The streets of Los Angeles were always busy. Cars zoomed by, people hurried to work, and the whole city never stopped moving. In the middle of it all was Keanu Reeves. He walked quickly, wearing his usual black suit. He had just finished an important meeting and was heading to a fancy hotel for a charity event. The event was meant to help families in need. Keanu didn't care much about the cameras or the fancy parties, but he believed in helping others, so he had to be there. Everything was going fine, until it happened. As he reached into his pocket for his phone, he heard a ripping sound. He stopped and looked at his arm. His suit sleeve had a big tear near the elbow. He sighed. He had to be on stage in less than an hour, and now his suit was ripped. Most famous people would call their stylists, buy a new suit, or get a tailor to rush over. But Keanu wasn't like most people. Instead of making a big deal about it, he looked around for a quick solution. That's when he saw it, a small tailor shop hidden between two big buildings. The sign above the door said, Delgado Tailor & Sons, since 1962. It looked old, almost forgotten, in the middle of the modern city. The window displays were dusty, and the fabrics inside looked faded. It wasn't a fancy designer shop, but Keanu didn't need fancy. He just needed someone who cared about their work. And he had a feeling he had just found that person. A little bell rang as Keanu stepped inside. The shop was quiet. It smelled like fabric and thread. Rolls of cloth were stacked against the walls, and there was one big work table in the back, lit by an old lamp. Behind the table, an old man sat hunched over a sewing machine. His hands looked worn from years of stitching clothes. He wore a simple white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, and a pair of glasses rested on his nose. He was working with complete focus, carefully sewing a piece of fabric. He didn't even notice Keanu come in. Keanu cleared his throat. "Excuse me." The old man looked up, blinking behind his glasses. He studied Keanu for a moment, then gave a small, tired smile. "Welcome. What can I do for you?" Keanu stepped forward and showed his torn sleeve. "I need a quick fix. Can you help?" The old man put down his work and gently touched the torn fabric. His fingers moved carefully, feeling the damage. He muttered. "Fine fabric. Italian wool." Keanu nodded. The tailor smiled. "A good suit. Worn well." Keanu chuckled. "A little too well, apparently." The tailor nodded. "I can fix this." Keanu glanced at the clock. "I have to be somewhere in 40 minutes. The old man didn't hesitate. "Then I'll do it in 30. And with that, he got to work. Keanu sat down and watched as the tailor sewed. His hands moved fast but carefully. Every stitch was perfect, not too loose, not too tight. Even though time was short, the old man never rushed. He worked with confidence, like someone who had done this for a lifetime. "You've been doing this a long time," Keanu said. The old man smiled without looking up. 53 years. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "That's impressive." The tailor shrugged. "It's a simple life. Not always easy, but it's mine." Keanu nodded. He understood that feeling more than most people would think. Just then, another voice interrupted. A younger man stepped in from the back carrying a pile of fabric. He looked about 25 with sharp features but tired eyes. "Papa, I finished organizing the stock," the young man said. Then he noticed Keanu. His eyes went wide. You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu smiled. "Guilty." The young man's mouth opened and closed. I can't believe this." The old tailor, however, kept sewing without reacting. "I know," he said calmly, not even looking up. The young man blinked. "Wait, you knew?" The old man chuckled. "Of course. You think an old man like me doesn't watch movies?" Keanu laughed. "But you didn't say anything." The tailor shrugged. "Why would I? You needed a tailor. I'm a tailor. That's all that matters." Keanu felt a wave of respect for him. This man didn't care about fame. He only cared about his craft, his work, and his customers. And that was rare. 30 minutes later, the old man was done, right on time. He handed Keanu the jacket. The tear was gone, as if it had never been there. Keanu put it on and moved his arm. The stitches held perfectly. "It's flawless," he said, genuinely impressed. The tailor smiled. "A suit should feel like a second skin, not a burden." Keanu nodded. "How much do I owe you?" The tailor waved a hand. "For you? Nothing." Keanu frowned. "No, I can't accept that." The tailor looked at him with twinkling eyes. "Then repay me with a story." Keanu paused. "A story?" The old man nodded. "Tell me, what's the most important lesson you've ever learned?" Keanu thought for a moment, then smiled. "Kindness," he said. "Even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's world." The old man studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. A good lesson. Keanu left a generous tip on the counter anyway. Then he shook the tailor's hand. I'll be back, he said. The tailor smiled. I'll be here. And with that, Keanu walked out, never knowing that what he had just done would change the tailor's life forever. Inside the tailor's shop, Javier Delgado sat down with a tired sigh, rubbing his eyes. His son Mateo still stood by the counter looking stunned. Papa, Mateo murmured. That was Keanu Reeves. Javier chuckled. I know. Mateo shook his head, still shocked. And you didn't even act surprised? Javier shrugged. Why would I? He was just a man who needed his suit fixed. Mateo exhaled, pacing slightly. Yeah, but he's a millionaire, Papa. You could have charged him hundreds, thousands. He wouldn't have blinked. Javier frowned. And why would I do that? Mateo gestured around the small, dimly lit shop. Because we need the money. Look around, Papa. Business isn't what it used to be. No one comes to small tailors anymore. Not when they can buy cheap suits off the rack or go to big brands. The old man rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his son's words. He knew Mateo wasn't wrong. For decades, Delgado Tailor & Sons had been a beloved shop. Back when people cared about how their clothes were made. When quality mattered. But times had changed. Now people want fast fashion, cheap and easy. Customers had stopped coming. Bills had piled up. And the truth was, the shop was on the verge of closing. Javier had tried to hide the worst of it from Mateo. But his son wasn't blind. Mateo crossed his arms. Papa, why do you keep holding on to this place? Javier looked around, his eyes softening. Because this shop is my life, he said simply. It's not about the money. It's about work, the history, the people. Mateo sighed. But before he could say anything else, one day the shop door jingled as a woman walked in. She had been coming to the shop for many years. When she saw the tailor, Javier Delgado, she smiled. Hello, Delgado. I need some clothes fixed. Do you have time? Javier was very tired, but his eyes lit up with happiness. Of course, he said. I always have time. Even though he was getting old and didn't know how much longer he could work, he loved his job. The next morning, Javier came to his shop early, just like he had for 53 years. He unlocked the door, ready for another normal day. Maybe he would fix some clothes, see some regular customers, or meet someone new. But something unexpected happened. The phone rang loudly, making Javier jump. He picked it up. Delgado Tailor & Sons, he said. A woman with a professional voice answered. Good morning. My name is Sarah. I work with Mr. Keanu Reeves. Javier's eyebrows went up. Keanu Reeves? He asked. Yes, sir, Sarah said. Mr. Reeves was very impressed with your work last night. He would like to ask you for a special job. Javier was confused. A special job? He asked. What do you mean? There was a short silence before Sarah explained. Mr. Reeves wants you to make a full set of custom clothes for him. Javier almost dropped the phone. He had fixed thousands of clothes, suits, dresses, coats, but making a whole set of new clothes for a famous movie star? That was something new. I don't know what to say, he stuttered. Sarah laughed. Mr. Reeves thought you might say that, she said. He also has one more request. If you agree, he wants your name to be on everything he wears. He wants people to know about your shop. Javier's heart raced. Keanu Reeves, a world-famous actor, wanted to tell people about his little tailor shop? This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to save his business. When do we start? Javier asked. That afternoon, Keanu Reeves walked back into the shop, this time looking serious. Javier and his son Mateo were waiting. Are you really serious about this? Mateo asked. Keanu smiled. Completely, he said. Javier cleared his throat. But why me? You can afford the best designers in the world, he said. Keanu looked straight at him. I already found the best, he answered. The shop went silent. Javier felt his eyes fill with tears. For the first time in years, he felt proud. For weeks, Keanu kept coming back for fittings. He and Javier talked about the designs, the colors, the fabric. The news spread quickly. Keanu Reeves had chosen Delgado Tailor & Sons to make his clothes. Soon, more and more people came wanting their own clothes made by Javier. Then, the most amazing thing happened. Keanu wore one of Javier's suits to a big event with lots of cameras. A reporter stopped him. You always look great, Keanu. But this suit looks extra special. Who made it? She asked. Keanu smiled. This was made by Javier Delgado, he said. A tailor who has been making clothes for over 50 years. He's the real star here. Javier was watching from home. His hands shook. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tears rolled down his face. For so long he had worked in silence. No one noticed his hard work. But now the whole world knows his name. The next morning, Javier thought everything would go back to normal. Sure, Keanu had mentioned his name, but would that really change anything? When he arrived at the shop, he couldn't believe his eyes. There was a huge line of people outside his door. Men in suits, young fashion students, regular people. Everyone wanted to see the tailor who made Keanu Reeves' suit. Javier froze. He couldn't even breathe. Beside him, Mateo whispered, "Papa, do you see this?" Javier nodded slowly. After all these years, people had finally noticed him. The first customer in line stepped forward. He was a tall man wearing a nice suit. "Mr. Delgado," the man said, smiling. "I saw Keanu on TV last night. He spoke so highly of you, I had to come see for myself." Javier blinked. "Thank you," he said. "What can I do for you?" The man grinned. "I want the same thing Keanu had, a suit made just for me." Javier looked at Mateo. Mateo nodded as if saying, "Say yes, Papa. This is your time." Excitement bubbled up inside Javier. He turned back to the man and smiled. "Then let's get started." The news spread fast. TV stations talked about the humble tailor who had impressed a Hollywood star. Social media exploded with people wanting to know more about Javier. Orders poured in. For the first time in years, Javier wasn't worried about money. His shop was alive again. One day, Mateo ran into the shop holding his tablet. "Papa," he said out of breath, "a big fancy brand wants to work with us. They want to sell our suits everywhere." Javier looked up from his sewing. He thought for a moment, then shook his head with a small smile. "No." Mateo frowned. "No? But this could make us even bigger." Javier chuckled. "Mateo, I don't do this to be famous. I do this because I love making clothes. I love seeing people feel their best in something I made. This shop, this is home. I don't need more than this." Mateo sighed, then laughed. "You really are something else, Papa." Javier smirked. "Just an old man with a needle and thread." A few weeks later, the doorbell chimed. A new customer? Javier looked up and smiled. Keanu Reeves stood in the doorway wearing one of Javier's suits. The shop fell silent. Everyone stared. Keanu walked up to the counter and grinned. "I told you I'd be back," he said. Javier laughed. "And I told you I'd be here," he replied. Keanu looked around at the busy shop, at all the happy customers, at the shelves filled with beautiful fabrics. "You did this, Javier," he said softly. Javier shook his head. "No, Keanu. You did this. You made people see what was always here." Javier's heart swelled with happiness. He didn't need to be rich. He didn't need to be famous. He just needed to know that his work mattered. And now the whole world knows it too. Keanu took something from his pocket and put it on the counter. It was an invitation. An invitation to what? Javier asked. Keanu smiled. "A special party for some of the most famous people in Hollywood. They all want to meet the man who makes my suits." Javier looked at the invitation. All his life he had been invisible, a simple tailor working in the background. But now he was the center of attention. For the first time in 50 years, Javier Delgado wasn't just making suits. He was making history. His small tailor shop, which was once almost forgotten, was now famous. The shelves were no longer covered in dust. Instead, they were filled with the best fabrics. The sound of his sewing machine, once quiet and lonely, was now busy and full of life. It was the music of his dreams finally coming true. And all of this happened because of one simple act of kindness. One moment of hard work that changed everything. Now, Javier sat in his shop, staring at the invitation that Keanu Reeves had given him. It was an invitation to one of the biggest Hollywood parties of the year. But this time he wasn't going as a guest. He wasn't just a man working in the shadows. He was the tailor everyone wanted to meet. For the first time, Javier wasn't just making clothes for someone else's story. He was becoming part of the story himself. Javier's son Mateo was more excited than ever. As soon as Javier agreed to go to the party, Mateo got to work. He made sure his father had the perfect suit, a suit made by the tailor himself. "You can't just wear anything, Papa," Mateo said. "This is the most important night of your life. You're finally getting the respect you deserve." Javier smiled but stayed humble. "I don't need fame, Mio," he said softly. "I just need my work to speak for itself." And that was exactly what was happening. When the night of the party arrived, Javier found himself in a place he had never dreamed of going. The ballroom was huge, with shining chandeliers, golden decorations, and famous people everywhere, wearing the most expensive clothes in the world. As he walked in, escorted by Keanu Reeves himself, Javier felt out of place. These were people who had lived their whole lives in the spotlight. He had spent his life in a tiny shop, behind a sewing machine, unseen by the world. But tonight, everyone was looking at him. The whispers started immediately. "Who's that with Keanu? That's the tailor who made his suit. I heard Keanu stopped wearing designer brands just to wear his clothes." Javier could feel all their eyes on him. But Keanu walked beside him, calm and confident. Then something happened that Javier never expected. One by one, celebrities, designers, and powerful people started coming up to him. A famous director shook his hand. "I need a suit for my next movie premiere. Can I make an appointment?" A famous actress smiled. "Do you make dresses? I'd love to wear something handmade." Even the owner of a huge fashion company stepped forward, looking at Javier with interest. "I run one of the biggest fashion brands in Europe. I'd like to talk about working together." Javier could hardly believe it. For years he had worked in silence, unnoticed. Now, the most powerful people in fashion and film were asking for his work. It was exciting. It was overwhelming. But most of all, it proved one thing: hard work never goes unnoticed. As the night went on, Javier found himself talking to some of the most famous designers in the world. One of them, the CEO of a top fashion brand, leaned in close and whispered, "You have real talent. More than that, you have something most designers lost a long time ago: heart." Javier smiled humbly. "Thank you. I just love what I do." The CEO smirked. "That's why I want to make you an offer." He placed a fancy business card on the table. "How would you like to join my brand? You'd have full control over your own collection, your name on clothes sold all over the world." Javier blinked. He looked at the card, then at Keanu. Keanu said nothing. He was waiting for Javier's decision. Javier knew what this meant. It would bring him money, fame, and security. His name would be known worldwide. He would never have to struggle again. But it wouldn't be his work anymore. It would be part of a big company, mass-produced, with his name on it. It wouldn't be the work he loved. Javier took a deep breath. Then he did something no one at that table expected. He shook his head. "Thank you," he said. "But my work belongs in my hands, not in a factory." Silence. Then Keanu smiled. And in that moment, Javier knew he had made the right choice. The next morning, when Javier returned to his shop, he didn't feel like he had turned down the biggest opportunity of his life. He felt like he had protected something priceless. His shop was busier than ever. People now came from all over, not because his name was on a big fashion brand, but because they wanted something made by him. A suit that wasn't just sewn together, but crafted with care. Mateo was still in shock. "Papa, you really said no to a billion-dollar brand?" Javier chuckled. "Mio, I've spent my whole life making things with my hands. Why would I stop now?" One evening, Keanu stopped by the shop again. No cameras. No press. Just him like always. "You turned them down," Keanu said, leaning against the counter. Javier smiled. "It wasn't even a hard choice." Keanu nodded, respect in his eyes. "Most people wouldn't have been able to say no," he said. "Most people wouldn't have had the courage to walk away from money, fame, and security." Javier crossed his arms. "Most people don't understand that success isn't about how much you make. It's about doing something that makes you proud." Keanu smiled. "Well, Javier, I'm proud of you." Javier chuckled. "And I'm proud of my work." Keanu adjusted the suit Javier had made him. "That's why I'll never go to another tailor again." And just like that, Javier knew he didn't need a global fashion empire. He didn't need the biggest name in the world, because his name was already enough. And for the first time in his life, the world finally saw it. The streets of Los Angeles were as busy as ever. But inside Delgado Tailor & Sons, the world was calm, steady, and filled with purpose. The small shop that was once forgotten was now thriving. Business executives, actors, fashion lovers, and everyday people all came to Javier's shop, wanting a suit made by him. But Javier didn't let success change him. He still stitched every suit with care. He still greeted every customer himself. He still measured each client by hand. Because for Javier Delgado, tailoring wasn't just about clothes. It was about craftsmanship. It was about legacy. And for the first time in his life, he knew his work truly mattered. The shop worked well and everything ran smoothly. Even with all the success, Javier did not want to change. Some days Mateo, his son, would shake his head and say, "Papa, we have offers to open another shop. Why don't you want to grow?" Javier would just smile and say the same thing every time, "This shop is my home and I don't need more than that." Mateo sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. "But Papa, think about how many more people we could help if we had another shop." Javier chuckled. "Mijo, I don't need to serve the whole world. I just want to help the people who come through that door." Mateo groaned but didn't argue anymore. Deep down he understood. His father was never about making more money or becoming famous. He loved his work and no amount of success would change that. Life was good. The shop was always busy. Javier's name had become well known in the world of fashion. People whispered about his beautiful work. But one afternoon everything changed. Javier had just finished working on a suit when he heard Mateo yell from the front of the shop, "Papa, come quick." Javier's heart jumped. He ran to the front, expecting something bad, maybe a fire or an accident. But instead he saw a long black car parked outside. The door of the car opened, and out stepped one of the most famous fashion designers in the world. She had dressed presidents, kings, and movie stars. And now she was walking toward Javier's small shop. Javier's heart pounded. Mateo looked like he was about to faint. The woman walked in, took off her sunglasses, and looked around the shop. Then she turned to Javier. "I assume you're Javier Delgado?" she asked in a fancy voice. Javier nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. "Good. We need to talk." The woman told him her name, but Javier already knew who she was. Then she made an offer that shocked everyone. "I want you to be the lead designer for my next collection," she said. "Not just a small job. I want you to be in charge." Mateo's mouth dropped open. Javier was speechless. The woman kept talking. "I have been watching your work ever since Keanu Reeves wore one of your suits. Fashion has lost its heart. People only care about what's popular. They forget about real craftsmanship. But you still care." She crossed her arms and said, "So, will you take your work to the world stage?" The shop was silent. Everyone stared at Javier. Mateo was shaking with excitement. This was it. The biggest moment of Javier's life. But instead of saying yes right away, Javier just smiled and looked around. He saw the shelves, the sewing machines, the fabrics. This was his home. Then, he looked at the woman and gave her an answer no one expected. The shop was quiet. Javier stood face to face with the most powerful woman in fashion. She had just given him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Mateo stood beside him, clenching his fists. He could barely breathe. This was everything Mateo had ever wanted for his father: fame, power, success. But Javier didn't answer right away. He just looked around at his little shop. The sewing machines, the old photos on the walls, the fabrics neatly stacked in the corners. This was his world. This was his life. Mateo was the first to speak. "Papa, this is your chance. Imagine what you could do with a big team. You wouldn't have to struggle anymore." Javier nodded. He knew this was more than just a job. It was a way to escape the hard times. It was security. But then a little voice inside him asked, would it still be my work? Would his suit still feel special? Would the fast-moving fashion world let him take his time, stitch by stitch? Javier took a deep breath. Then he asked the woman, "If I take this job, what happens to my shop?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "You won't need this shop anymore. You'll have the best studios, the best materials, and the best tailors working for you." Javier's fingers twitched. The best tailors working for him. Not with him. Under him. He would no longer be the man sewing the suits. He would just be in charge, watching from a distance. Would he still love it if he wasn't holding the needle? The woman saw his hesitation and said, "You don't have to answer now. Think about it. This is your chance to be remembered." That night, after everyone went home, Javier sat alone in his shop, running his fingers over a piece of fabric. The shop bell chimed softly. Javier looked up, expecting a customer. But it was Keanu Reeves. The actor walked in, calm and knowing. "I heard about the offer," he said. Javier chuckled. "I figured you did." Keanu sat across from him. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Keanu finally asked, "Are you going to take it?" Javier sighed. "Everyone says I should." Keanu looked at him and asked the one question no one else had. "But do you want to?" Javier looked down at his hands that had spent over 50 years sewing, cutting, and creating. He thought about what really mattered. Not what the world wanted. Not what made sense on paper. But what made him feel happy inside. He looked back at Keanu and smiled. "No," he said. Keanu chuckled. "I figured." Javier shook his head, laughing. "Everyone else thinks I'm crazy." Keanu shrugged. "Maybe. But the best people usually are." The next morning, Javier held a press conference. It wasn't his idea. The fashion world wanted an answer, and Matteo thought it was best to tell everyone at once. The room was packed. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in, ready to hear what he would say. Javier stepped forward. He was calm and sure of his choice. "I want to thank everyone for their support," he said. "I have been given an amazing offer. But after much thought, I have decided to say no." The room exploded with shock. People gasped. Reporters scribbled notes. Javier continued, "I did not become a tailor to be famous. I became a tailor because I love the work. I love art. I love knowing that something I made with my own hands gives people confidence." He looked straight at the cameras. "I built something here that cannot be replaced by a big company. My suits do not belong in factories. They belong here in my shop where every stitch matters." His voice was strong. "I am and always will be a tailor." The news spread fast. Some people thought he was foolish. Others called him a hero for staying true to his art. Delgado Tailor and Sons became more famous than ever. Not because it became a big company, but because it became a symbol of real craftsmanship. People started caring about handmade work again. And Javier? Javier kept doing what he always did, sewing, measuring, and creating. But now, when he looked up, he saw more customers, more smiles, and Matteo learning beside him. One day, Keanu Reeves walked in again, grinning. "I need another suit," he said. Javier laughed. "I'll make you the best one yet." Because true success isn't about money or fame. It's about doing what you love the way you love it. And in that way, Javier Delgado had already won. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.